America is undergoing a transformation it hasn't experienced in generations, a sweeping national purge. By 2025, mass deportations surged across the nation as states deployed police forces, expanded detention networks, and passed aggressive new laws designed to drive undocumented immigrants out. Households were ripped apart, entire communities hollowed overnight, and billions of dollars redirected toward enforcement. And here's the harsh reality: 2026 will be even more unforgiving. States aren't retreating, they're intensifying. Legislators are crafting harsher rules, widening 287(g) partnerships, and attacking sanctuary protections head-on. The gloves are off. The crackdown is accelerating. These are the 10 U.S. states where the deportation machine is just beginning to unleash its full force. Number 10, South Carolina. In 2025, South Carolina shifted from a quiet enforcer to one of the most vocal architects of hard-line immigration policy. After years of rising concern over undocumented migration, with nearly 120,000 individuals living within state borders, lawmakers introduced measures forcing every county jail to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. By mid-2025, legislative proposals mandated immigration status checks for anyone taken into custody, regardless of the offense. Even more controversial was the proposed $500 reward incentive for public tips resulting in removals, a move critics compared to bounty-style enforcement, while supporters celebrated it as community-powered security. What's fueling South Carolina's escalation? Economics and crime perception. The state recorded a 15% rise in public service expenditures linked to undocumented residents, from emergency room treatment to public education. County officials claimed they were absorbing millions in fiscal burdens they could no longer sustain. On public safety, lawmakers pointed to highly publicized crimes involving undocumented suspects, arguing that trust in the justice system was on the line. This message resonated heavily in suburban and rural regions. Regional politics also played a major role. With Georgia and Florida ramping up enforcement, South Carolina leaders feared becoming a perceived, weak link in the Southeast. Which is why 2026 is projected to be even stricter. If funding is fully approved for new enforcement programs and 287(g) collaborations expand, deportations could jump 20 to 30% beyond 2025 levels. Last year was merely the testing ground. 2026 is when consequences become undeniable. South Carolina may not rank among the largest immigrant states, but it is rapidly emerging as one of the most relentless. Number 9, Mississippi. Mississippi historically stayed on the sidelines of the national immigration debate, until 2025 upended the status quo. Lawmakers advanced the Mississippi Immigration Enforcement Act, a sweeping initiative poised to create one of the fiercest crackdowns in America. The proposal mandates that every county jail enter 287(g) agreements, effectively deputizing local sheriffs to enforce federal immigration laws directly. The headline-grabbing detail? The governor would gain power to remove any sheriff or police chief who refused to comply. That level of forced alignment is astonishing, a clear signal that Mississippi intends to eliminate all resistance to deportation efforts. Economic strain is the foundation of this approach. With one of the lowest median household incomes in the nation, about $55,000, the state argues it cannot afford the financial burden of supporting undocumented populations. Roughly 35,000 undocumented immigrants live in Mississippi, and officials point to more than $100 million annually spent on education, healthcare, and other public services. In 2025, hospitals and school districts demanded immediate relief as costs mounted. Political momentum added fuel. With Texas and Florida leading a southern enforcement wave, Mississippi lawmakers were determined not to be seen as passive. Numerous counties advocated for stronger state intervention as migrant numbers grew. Critics warned of civil rights violations, but supporters insisted these changes were essential for economic stability and community safety. Looking into 2026, the trajectory is clear: a sharp escalation. Mandatory 287(g) enforcement could drive deportations up by at least 25%. And by granting the governor disciplinary authority over local law enforcement, a new culture is forming, one where declining to assist ICE is simply not tolerated. Mississippi may have a smaller undocumented population than border region states, but the consequences are real, making it one of the harshest environments in America for anyone living without legal status. Number 8, Alabama. Alabama has a long history of uncompromising immigration legislation. Its 2011 law once stood as the toughest in the nation, and in 2025, that legacy made a powerful comeback. New rules now require officers to verify immigration status whenever reasonable suspicion exists during any stop or arrest, effectively reinstating a modern version of the "show me your papers" system. With police obligated to alert federal authorities, even a minor traffic violation could now set off the removal process. The numbers illuminate why Alabama doubled down. An estimated 85,000 undocumented individuals live in the state, a modest figure compared to giants like Texas, but significant in a state with fewer than 5 million residents. Officials claim over $250 million in annual education and healthcare expenses are tied to those without legal status, a financial load they argue Alabama cannot sustain. County sheriffs from Jefferson and Mobile testified in 2025 that their facilities were housing record numbers of undocumented detainees, draining local budgets. Meanwhile, political incentives grew. With multiple state officials facing re-election, immigration became a defining platform. Legislators promised voters they would tighten control, and they delivered. Civil rights advocates warned the new laws could encourage racial profiling and constitutional violations. Supporters counter that Alabama is simply matching the assertiveness of Florida and Georgia. The projection for 2026? A dramatic spike in removals. With every sheriff required to collaborate with ICE and officers empowered to proactively initiate checks, deportations could surge by 30%. The state is moving toward a near-zero-tolerance environment. For undocumented families in Alabama, ordinary life becomes a risk. Commuting to work, taking children to school, or even being pulled over for a broken tail light may now trigger the first step toward deportation. By 2026, Alabama is on track to become one of the most unwelcoming states in the United States for anyone without lawful status. Number 7, Tennessee. Tennessee's transformation in 2025 was dramatic and unapologetic. The legislature approved a landmark statute that made it a felony for any local official to even vote in favor of sanctuary-style policies. It wasn't merely a legal shift, it was a thunderous declaration. By criminalizing political support for sanctuary protections, Tennessee effectively silenced dissent and erased the possibility of local resistance. Cities, counties, and law enforcement departments were forced into absolute alignment with federal immigration enforcement. But this wasn't just symbolic intimidation. The policy was backed by strategic funding. A brand new grant program funneled millions of dollars into sheriff's offices and police departments that deepened cooperation with ICE. Money specifically supported increasing detention capacity, expanding prisoner transport operations, and training officers under 287(g), essentially turning local police into front-line immigration agents. By the close of 2025, major counties such as Davidson and Knox were already negotiating expansions of these agreements. Economic pressure played a crucial role. Officials in Nashville and Memphis issued urgent warnings about surging public costs, with estimates exceeding $300 million annually in spending attributed to undocumented populations. Lawmakers seized on those numbers, arguing that the state should no longer absorb the costs of what they labeled a federal failure. Polling reinforced the political appetite. Two-thirds of Tennessee voters supported tougher enforcement measures in 2025. Legislators, empowered by public backing, moved aggressively. So, what's coming in 2026? Tennessee is expected to tighten the screws even further. With the legal framework already in place, any official who resists faces not just penalties, but potential jail time. Projections show deportations jumping by 35%, driven by expanded jail-to-ICE pipelines. Unlike states where sanctuary cities create patchwork enforcement, Tennessee is establishing total consistency statewide. This is a system built on coercion, funding, and political muscle, ensuring that by 2026, any undocumented resident in Tennessee will be navigating a relentless, state-engineered path straight into the federal removal process. Number 6, Illinois. Illinois is rarely the first name in conversations about mass deportation. Yet by 2025, it found itself at the center of a humanitarian and political storm. Chicago witnessed an overwhelming migrant influx, over 25,000 new arrivals within a single year, pushing the city's emergency infrastructure to its limits. Shelters overflowed. City budgets buckled. Debates intensified into some of the most contentious in Illinois history. By late 2025, the governor and city leaders were forced to reconsider programs and principles that once earned Illinois its sanctuary state identity. What sets Illinois apart is the growing grassroots backlash. Schools publicly reported severe overcrowding. Hospitals highlighted tens of millions in uncompensated emergency care. And Chicago alone disclosed expenditures exceeding $250 million for migrant support, a figure that stunned surrounding suburban counties, who feared they would become redistribution hubs next. For now, the state still formally protects undocumented residents, but pressure is eroding those foundations quickly. While Illinois hasn't yet copied the extreme mandates of Texas or Florida, cracks are spreading fast. Proposals for mandatory E-Verify, heightened ICE collaboration, and major cuts to migrant assistance are gaining bipartisan momentum heading into 2026. The political writing is unmistakable. Illinois is entering an election year where immigration will dominate every debate, campaign, and headline. New legislation is expected, most notably requiring local jails in counties like DuPage and Cook to directly report immigration status to federal authorities. A change that could trigger a 20% surge in deportations through simple compliance. This shift isn't fueled by ideology alone, it's driven by economics. Residents already squeezed by high taxes and inflation are no longer willing to shoulder the additional cost burden. In 2026, Illinois is likely to pivot sharply from sanctuary protections to overt enforcement, motivated not by border politics, but by budget survival. Number 5, Arizona. Arizona remains the front line of America's immigration battles, and 2025 proved exactly why. Border apprehensions in the state surpassed 400,000 encounters, igniting enormous pressure on lawmakers to act swiftly and aggressively. The state responded with Executive Order 2025-01, which expanded state-directed border security efforts and pushed local police into deeper alignment with ICE. And in the legislature, debates escalated toward controversial proposals, including public bounty-style rewards for reporting undocumented individuals. Though the governor signaled opposition, the fact that such measures entered serious consideration reflects how intense the political climate has become. Economic strain remains the loudest argument. Emergency medical care connected to undocumented residents cost more than $150 million in 2025. Schools in Tucson, Phoenix, and surrounding regions reported rapid enrollment spikes requiring emergency budget reallocations. Border counties such as Cochise and Pima demanded expanded state police presence and mandatory compliance with ICE detainers. Public sentiment hardened in 2025. Polls showed more than 70% of residents favoring stricter enforcement. Many Arizonans believe they've been abandoned by Washington, and that narrative is powering next year's agenda. The forecast for 2026: even tougher mandates. Lawmakers are preparing proposals requiring mandatory statewide 287(g) adoption, effectively deputizing every sheriff as an immigration enforcement officer. Analysts predict a 30 to 35% increase in deportations, particularly in the southern corridor. Daily life for undocumented residents will only grow more perilous, with both state and local authorities actively engaged in enforcement. Arizona is no longer reacting, it is shaping a border-first doctrine that other states are watching closely and preparing to replicate. Number 4, Georgia. Georgia may not share a border with Mexico, but in 2025, it acted like a frontline state. The catalyst was House Bill 11,005, a sweeping measure that made cooperation with ICE mandatory statewide. Sheriffs and jail administrators lost the ability to decline ICE detainers. Compliance is no longer optional, it's required by law. The legislation also introduced a striking new provision: DNA collection from non-citizens arrested for specific crimes, allowing faster identification, prosecution, and deportation. Georgia's numbers explain the urgency: an estimated 350,000 undocumented residents, concentrated in metro Atlanta and agricultural hubs. County jails reported tens of millions of dollars annually in detention and public safety costs. Meanwhile, rising wages and a tight labor market sharpened disputes over undocumented labor and wage competition. Accountability became the enforcement weapon of choice in 2025. HB 11,005 empowered the state to audit local agencies, with harsh budget penalties for any jurisdiction failing to comply. This represented a direct challenge to sanctuary-leaning areas like Atlanta. By the close of 2025, multiple counties increased their transfer rates of detainees to ICE, and deportations climbed visibly. The 2026 outlook is severe. With statewide compliance locked in, deportations could surge by 40%, transforming Georgia into one of the toughest inland enforcement regimes in the country. This isn't the brute force approach of Texas, it's bureaucratic precision. Georgia is constructing a system where data tracking, mandatory reporting, and administrative control corner undocumented immigrants at every point of contact. 2026 will be the year where Georgia's interior enforcement strategy fully reshapes the immigrant landscape, quietly, efficiently, and relentlessly. Number 3, Florida. Florida continues to rank among the nation's most uncompromising states on immigration enforcement, and 2025 solidified that stance. The governor's policies tightened their grip by tying state funding and public grants directly to mandatory E-Verify compliance, forcing every employer engaged with state contracts, including construction firms, school systems, and healthcare institutions, to verify the legal status of every worker. Legal challenges targeted the broader immigration package, yet the workplace enforcement and state audit provisions remained fully intact, keeping continuous pressure on both hiring networks and undocumented laborers. Florida's motivations are rooted in sheer scale and economic strain. By 2025, an estimated 800,000 undocumented immigrants lived in the state, concentrated in agriculture, hospitality, construction, and tourism. Meanwhile, state spending on migrant-related programs surged beyond $1 billion annually, draining budgets in major counties like Miami-Dade, Broward, and Orange. Miami officials cited housing shortages directly linked to migrant arrivals, fueling public anger and forcing politicians into aggressive action. Public safety narratives also intensified the crackdown. High-profile crimes involving undocumented individuals were leveraged as evidence that sanctuary protections jeopardize community security. Businesses sounded alarms over potential labor shortages, especially in construction, but the state refused to budge, insisting the priority was safeguarding jobs for legal workers and reducing the taxpayer burden. Looking toward 2026, Florida is expected to harden its enforcement infrastructure even further. Steeper penalties for e-verify violations, expanded ICE cooperation at every county jail, additional state-funded enforcement strike units. Analysts project deportations could increase 30% to 40%, particularly as counties face financial audits and risk losing millions in state support if they fail to comply. In Florida, enforcement now reaches far beyond police departments. It permeates the workplace, housing market, welfare programs, and public institutions. For undocumented immigrants, every part of daily life has become a potential trigger point for detention and removal. Number 2, Louisiana. Louisiana stunned the country in 2025 by enacting some of the most punitive immigration laws in the United States. At the core was Act 399, making it a felony for law enforcement officials to disregard ICE detainers. That level of state-mandated cooperation is unprecedented. Sheriffs, jail commanders, and even police chiefs can now face incarceration for refusing to transfer detainees to federal custody, turning Louisiana into a national proving ground for forced compliance strategies. State leaders justified the move through a dual argument: financial pressure and cultural preservation. With roughly 150,000 undocumented residents, Louisiana estimated annual expenditures exceeding $300 million, particularly in Medicaid-linked emergency care and public education. Larger cities like New Orleans and Baton Rouge argued that they were at a breaking point, while rural parishes feared becoming overflow destinations for relocated migrants. By late 2025, the Attorney General was actively dismantling sanctuary-leaning policies, threatening lawsuits, stripping local authority, and warning of state takeovers. Conservative lawmakers, driven by campaign promises to restore security and fiscal order, pushed even tougher bills requiring agencies to track immigration status among beneficiaries of state aid, while dramatically escalating penalties for non-compliance. 2026 will escalate the pressure. With Act 399 fully operational, jail-based removals could rise 35%, as sheriffs now have no lawful path to decline ICE partnerships. The repercussions will radiate outward, tightening immigration checks in schools, medical facilities, and workplaces as the state attaches funding requirements to enforcement cooperation. Louisiana's message is unmistakable: undocumented immigrants will find little refuge here. By 2026, the state is expected to rank just behind Texas in severity, showcasing how aggressively the Deep South is reshaping America's deportation landscape. Number 1, Texas. Texas remains the command center of America's immigration enforcement war. In 2025, the state enacted Senate Bill 4 and Senate Bill 8, two transformative policies that pushed Texas far ahead of every other state. SB 4 authorizes police to arrest individuals merely suspected of unauthorized entry, while SB 8 requires all counties to adopt 287G agreements with ICE by January 1, 2026, effectively deputizing local officers as federal immigration agents. The scale of investment is staggering. Texas already shoulders over 40% of all U.S. border encounters. Operation Lone Star poured more than $5 billion into deploying state troopers, National Guard units, drones, and detention expansion, all justified as compensation for what state leaders describe as federal abandonment. By the end of 2025, county participation in ICE handover agreements surged, and holding capacity increased significantly, creating the most integrated state-driven deportation pipeline in the nation. Politically, Texans overwhelmingly supported the hardline direction. Even as lawsuits challenged SB 4, the enforcement network, funding commitments, and county mandates continued expanding without pause. The legislative framework is designed to sustain large-scale operations regardless of federal actions. Projections for 2026 indicate the largest rise in removals in Texas history, an estimated 40% to 50% jump, as every sheriff's department is legally bound to funnel detainees into ICE's system. With unmatched border authority, nationwide support from southern counties, and billions in enforcement investment, Texas is not merely responding to migration. It is dictating the national blueprint for aggressive, state-led removal. By 2026, Texas will be the most relentless state in America for anyone living without legal status, and its strategies are expected to influence the country for years ahead.